Okay, so just as a reminder, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and turn your video on, ask questions if you have them, make contributions if you've got them as well. That's always appreciated. What I want to show is just, obviously I was really hit by the news, as we all were, on was it a Tuesday night? I mean, I remember it was around like 8:30 p.m. Um, and was both shocked and not shocked, and like every emotion of like you just feel tired. And the next day, what I'd hoped to do was take a little time to do some research on what astrology is getting plucked right now. I find that helps kind of channel and focus my energy into it a little bit more productively. But I also realize that when I share this with the public, it also gives people who want to research this, maybe from a more intimate place and or with skills that I don't have, it just contributes to the body of research on the topic. So that's why I did this without, just on donation basis. Just wanted to make sure that it's open, to anybody who has a legitimate interest in this subject. So on the 2nd of May, around 8:30 p.m., you can see the timestamp here. We received a report of the leak from Politico that the Supreme Court was looking to overturn Roe v. Wade as a ruling for a case that it was currently hearing or had just recently heard in a previous session. And the judgment on that case was due in June, which we'll get to in a little bit. It was due in June, but it leaked. The draft opinion from Justice Alito was sent to Politico. Politico published it, and it came right after we had this eclipse. So what I'm showing you here in this chart is the solar eclipse. This is where we'll kind of start the astrology for tonight. There we go. It's the solar eclipse in Taurus, 10 degrees of Taurus in the 8th house. So, obviously when we think about anything that happens in Venus's signs, we need to start thinking about issues that affect women. And we have regularly seen that reproductive rights have been a place where that conversation often tends to fall onto. This chart, when you look at it, I mean, I think probably a lot of people would look at the eclipse chart and maybe struggle to see any specific reason why this issue should get brought up. And I think the reason for that is because there's some key signatures that you might not think to look for between a couple different charts. And so I think this, as a case study, is useful in understanding the role that the 4th house plays. It's useful in understanding the role that the triplicities can play in a conversation. And it's also, I think, a good case study in the use of house cusps, specific degrees, to be able to identify points of influence. So let me go ahead and share with you some thoughts that I have on this chart just briefly. I mean, this is just to introduce us into the theme, because then we're going to have to rewind the clock back and then bring it forward again. The very first thing that I noticed in this chart was that it had double 28 on the angles. I'm not saying there's anything to that, and I'm not saying that there's not. I have no point. It's just a quick way of me noting that we've got the exact same degrees on the ascendant in the midheaven, which creates the idealized square that happens between the ascendant and the midheaven with degrees in the zodiac. So what that means is that the visual squares and zodiacal squares, they line up in the sky, so it's an interesting theme to see. But what happens when the 1st and the 10th ruler are ruled by the same planet? It's not so obvious when it's the 1st and the 4th ruler. The focus on that tends to go in, I think, sometimes deeper ways, but it's often less visible and traceable. But when the 1st ruler and the 10th ruler are ruled by the same planet, you've got this indication that both the people and those who lead them are caught up in the same fate within this period of time. And it was interesting to me to find, Mercury being that planet. I had just done a judgment for somebody else and had to make a comment about how there was an application in that was building at the time of Venus applying to Mercury. And while that did bring significators we wanted back together, it's doing so as Mercury is stationing and then about to turn retrograde. And so I was speaking about how this is relevant to themes related to reversals and things taking a completely different tone. Things catching you on the back foot. And because this is the station moving retrograde, there's extra problem with that. The station moving forward is still very chaotic and uncomfortable for everybody, but it's, you know, it's different. All the universe is looking at that planet saying, thank goodness, you're turning it around, we're moving forward now. You know, that's not a frictionless activity to do, but at least you're moving toward where we're moving. This is moving in the opposite direction. So when I opened up this chart and saw that, well, what's happening here is Venus and Jupiter, two planets which are connected to reproductive rights, but particularly Venus, and that degree will be very relevant in ways that we will explore a little bit later. But Venus, after its conjunction to Jupiter, which it's just on the other, you know, within minutes of being on the other side of Jupiter, and then makes an application to that Mercury in the 9th house. Venus is a natural significator of fertility. It rules the 9th house, brings us our focus to the courts. The 1st and the 10th ruler are both placed in the 9th, applying to a square with Mars that will never perfect. What will happen is Mercury will turn retrograde before that actually perfects. So, you know, think about the symbolism of that in terms of where the trajectory of the story goes. This is, I know it's an eclipse chart. Well, I was going to say, I know that it's a lunation chart, but it's also an eclipse chart. So the effects of this are, this is a particularly powerful one. So we can probably bank on the astrology in this chart being really reliable in terms of timing and exploring how things develop with this story. I think this chart also has a very unique feature in the fact that 23 degrees of Scorpio is on the 3rd house cusp. I am thinking a lot about the leak. There's something about a south node that's just like on the 3rd cusp, which is so beautifully descriptive of a leak, you know, and the judgment of printed document being released out. South node all about things exiting and leaving, and then 3rd house about reports, written information. It's probably not the first place I would have gone, but that degree also becomes very relevant for us in ways that we will see as we move forward. I know we've got a few folks who are either here with us or attending through the recording who may not understand some of the dynamics that are related to Roe versus Wade. I just kind of wanted to point out the weight of the consequence of what happens here. These states that are in orange, or this red-orange tone, they belong to the group of 26 states that are either certain to, have promised to, or are likely to ban abortion if the Supreme Court does overturn Roe versus Wade. I know that a lot of these states are, you know, empty farmland. So I wanted to have a look today to get some kind of understanding about the population in these states and the geographical size to see if there's a relationship. And one of the things I was surprised to learn, probably thanks to places like Alaska, but was that these states do comprise 51% of the geography of the US, and their populations are 48%. So I remember when I was growing up talking about this issue going, well, there's not that many people who live in these states, or, you know, it's their problem to fix. And then you just realize, actually that's half our nation, you know, it's a really big deal. So this is a very divisive issue. It's been very prickly, you know, no matter what side you fall on. And it's a hard thing to discuss. And I realize that also I'm, you know, a cisgendered man. I don't have any experience with pregnancy. I've never gotten anybody pregnant. I don't, you know, this is very far outside my world. So what I will say is that I feel comfortable bringing to light the astrological connections that I think are valuable for people in our field to be aware of. I don't know that I want to comment anything about, you know, this particular situation, except to say that I know that I just trust women, and I know what the women in my life want me to support. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and move forward and start first with the Roe of Roe v. Wade. Her name was Norma Mccorvey. She had a bit of an interesting backstory in her life that we don't really need to get into right now. But I think one of the interesting parts about her story is that, she was kind of encouraged to take this case all the way up to the Supreme Court. She went along with it, and she was happy to have done that at the time, but later converted to Protestantism and then to Roman Catholicism. And upon her conversion, she then changed her point of view and perspective on Roe versus Wade, and spent the majority of the rest of her life seeking to overturn it, and in fact appeared before the Supreme Court again in 2006 to attempt to overturn Roe versus Wade herself, but she was unsuccessful. Now, when you look at her birth chart, I think that you will oh, yeah, this isn't correct. I think I replaced her birth time on another slide, and then I forgot to do it here. I mean, I can do it real quickly. It was very clearly a mistake on my part. I apologize. Let me just reload the image, and then we'll be in good shape. All right. There. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Okay, so when you take a look at her chart, I think you can see such a clear picture for somebody who's going to have significant amount of legal drama in their life. We've got, first of all, Mars ruling the ascendant, which is known for, fights and battles in general, but Mars is in the 9th, it's in Cancer, which shows, Cancer, the movable signs, they show things kind of moving relatively quickly. Yes, so Celeste has picked up on it, and I'll say it for the recording in a moment. So yeah, just hang on there. But this Mars here, it shows, her to be fighting in fields related to, maternal things that are related to the experience of women in these cases. So Mars, 9th house Cancer, it makes a great deal of sense to me. Saturn and Pluto here, I mean, it's almost to me, that the planets in the next sign are giving an illustration of the sense of, regret that she had about her involvement in this case, because she did come to say that this was the biggest mistake of her life, and she wished she hadn't gotten involved at all. And I think that her experience sounds very Saturn Pluto, on the other side of that. But to be honest, when you read about the initial court proceedings before it even went to the Supreme Court, you can see that somebody would have had to have Saturn and Pluto in the 9th house to be, putting the strength forward that she and her lawyer or legal team did in the face of, all the backlash that she was receiving. Jupiter, exaltation ruler of the 9th, but also the natural significator of law, is conjunct the South Node in the ascendant. I'm going to tell you that there are 4 bodies which regularly repeat themselves in all these charts, and it's just so consistent. 4 bodies and one other theme. The Moon, Venus, Mars, South Node. It's that story. And when you think about Moon, Venus, Mars, I immediately think about the watery triplicity. And the other part of this story that you will find is such a recurring theme of water signs on the 1st, on the 5th, and on the 9th when this conversation comes up. So in every chart that we move forward, I want to, it won't be in every single one of them, but it will be in enough of them to really catch you. And in the ones where it's not, you will still see those degrees occupied in very important ways. Right. I mean, there's other things that we could say about her chart. Of course, we could talk about how Mercury is in an applying square to Mars. Something that jumps out to me and is very clear is the exact square between the Moon and Venus. And you will see as we move through these charts that any time that this issue is debated in the courts, while it is actively being debated, we find hard aspects between the Moon and Venus. They're either in square, they're in opposition. If there are exceptions to this, they are extremely rare. I was looking for them and I thought one was on the fence, but it even still was very close. I mean, it was within orb of a square. So, and when this matter seems to be judged upon or resolved in some way, we find these 2 in trine. It's a very interesting pattern that shows up. So Moon, Venus, Mars, and the South Node, and they're all just jumping out in her chart. She's got the Moon in square to Venus. She's got a water sign on the ascendant, the 9th house and the 5th. She's got the ascendant ruler in the 9th in a water sign. It's Mars. She's got the South Node conjunct Jupiter in the ascendant. I mean, the signature really, I think this is why the universe plucked Norma Mccorvey out of obscurity to be the face to represent this particular theme, is because her birth chart is so strongly mirrors the national conversation, the tide of that conversation. So let me show you, move forward and give you a sense of what I'm talking about. But before we do, I just wanted to show you the new moon before Norma Mccorvey's birth. So just to clarify, Norma Mccorvey is the Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade. And you can see that we've again got 28 degrees mutable on the ascendant, kind of an interesting thing. And everything is pointing to a really strong 5th and 9th house theme. We've got the lunation before her birth falls in the 9th. It's ruled by a planet that's in the 9th. In Venus's sign, Venus is there too, ruling the 5th house. Again, you can see that there is the South Node Jupiter conjunction, but that will always be the case because when you've got 14 days max with prenatal lunations of any kind. But the point that I want to draw your attention to is it brings it to association with the ascendant, though, because Jupiter rules the ascendant. So we again have the, in a lunation chart, of course, moon is part of it. And we've got Mars part of it in this close trine to Jupiter, the ascendant ruler, the water signs. Like it still picks up all the same themes using completely different angles and different houses. And it's really quite a fascinating thing to see. But again, this would be, a secondary argument of Norma McCorvey living a life in the courts, in and out of legal battles. Now, this is the chart for when Roe versus Wade was first argued. I was able to look up court records and get times for the next couple of charts, so I feel good about presenting them. Take a look first. I just want to show you, where's my mouse? Remind yourself of Norma McCorvey's ascendant, her natal ascendant, 20 degrees Scorpio. And she's got the moon at 3 degrees of Capricorn. And when you take a look at the chart for when this conversation begins, you can see that we've got 22 degrees Scorpio on the midheaven and the moon in an exact sextile to her natal moon. Okay. So when this argument first opened, there was already a very strong theme that connected in with Norma McCorvey's birth chart. We've got Scorpio, water sign, in the 9th and the 10th. Mars is the next aspect of the midheaven, and it disposits the moon. It's in a water sign. We know that in court cases, the 2nd house shows the material witnesses for the prosecution, and that was Roe. And that's what we have, is a very clear signature of Mars, water sign, McCorvey's ascendant on the midheaven, and the moon at 3 degrees of Scorpio in the 9th house. Venus ruling the 9th house, bringing back together this connection with law, and it's in the 12th house. And the connection with Venus in the 12th house, I think, is going to become maybe a little bit more clear as we move through. So just hang on to that for now. But the 5th ruler, also Mercury, 19 degrees of Sagittarius. That degree will come up again at the time that this matter is resolved. So I'll bring that to your attention when we get there. But at any rate, this chart, it's pointing to, I think also not very good signification for the prosecution. Saturn's in opposition to Neptune. When Norma McCorvey talked about her experience on this case, she kind of intimates that, it wasn't all her idea. She kind of went along with this, idea from her legal team. And, eventually you get really, caught up in the cause and you want to win this because you put so much energy and time behind it. But, over time, she's had a different perspective and, it's all this. And when you take a look at this, the ascendant ruler being retrograde in the 4th in opposition to Neptune, I think you've got a fairly good argument here of some eventual form of reversal or some, struggle. Now, this case was first argued in the 13th of December, 1971, but it was re-argued because 2 justices retired, and there were some concerns about who was going to be able to write the majority opinion in that case, and the issues of each one of them essentially had, if they touched the issue, it would possibly backfire, so them writing the majority opinion was not the salient thing to do. So then it was re-argued, and what I want to show you is, some pretty amazing things happening in this chart. You can see that Norma McCorvey's ascendant, which was on the midheaven when it was first argued, has now come to the ascendant. The 10th ruler, which is the Mercury, again in the 12th, we got this 12th house connection that keeps coming up, but it's connected to the original chart's moon degree for degree. This is where we start to see the moon square Venus signature really strong. I mean, what's interesting about this chart is that both the first ruler and the 7th ruler are in their signs of debility. So we've got Mars ruling the ascendant, which is the prosecution. And that's going to be Mars conjunct Pluto in Libra. And then the 7th is ruled by Venus in her sign of fall in the 10th house. So it's an interesting signature for the arguments that were being made. The way that nobody's really shown quite well here, and it doesn't really say anything about the the topic under review, but more maybe the approach or the sense of efficiency. Norma Mccorvey's team is shown by Mars. I mean, she's got Mars in Cancer natally. And if you look, her natal Mars is right here. Remember, she had 20 degrees Scorpio rising. So these houses very closely match her own natal houses. We've got the South Node on the 9th house cusp, again, plugging itself in to these themes, again, in a water sign. When she was born, it was in Scorpio. Now we've got the North or South Node in Cancer on the 9th house cusp. The moon is in the ascendant, again, showing kind of the will of the people, moving towards the sides of the prosecution, and the moon is making an application toward Mars by sextile. It's aspecting Venus too, but it's doing so by square. So what's interesting, I think, as a community needing to interpret this is we have to consider that, the victory being shown here, it also shows a square to a debilitated Venus. And, what is the message there about how this conversation is still being had? So anyway, it's a connection that I think is quite fascinating and wanted to make sure to call attention to. And of course, at this time now, we've got a Jupiter part of fortune connection right on McCorvey's natal moon. If you remember, her natal moon is at 3 degrees of Capricorn. Now, if we take a look, the decision was later handed down. So this is the Capricorn ingress before the decision, which would be handed down in January. So just to give you the backdrop again, it was first argued in 71, and then it was re-argued in 72. And then there was the Capricorn ingress before the final delivery of the decision, which happened in January of 73. And this chart, there are some themes which, kind of repeat themselves. So remember that when the case was re-argued, we had the ascendant, we had the moon at 5 degrees of Sagittarius, and now we find the ascendant ruler is conjunct Neptune on the 5th house cusp. The moon is conjunct the South Node in a water sign. We've got the opposition to Jupiter that is now separating. The sun, which rules the 5th house, is in the 9th house, and it's, kind of the defining characteristic of this Capricorn ingress is the sun being right on the 9th house cusp. I mean, 0 degrees, very strong connection. And the moon's next aspect is it's the trine to Mars, and that is the same Mars, which is on the midheaven at the time this started. It's on the ascendant at the time it was re-argued, and it was on Mccorvey's natal ascendant as well, and part of fortune is here too. So this is a very clear. Jenny, did you want to say something? No, I don't know if you noted you unmuted yourself, so I'll mute you back. All good. Okay, so anyway, this is that kind of water theme that we're kind of seeing, moon to Mars, conjunction to the part of fortune, very clear, repetition of themes. I was able to get a specific time for the decision itself, thanks to Lena Chowan, who's here. I had not seen that this was on astro.com, but Lena pointed me to it, and so we were able to get a specific time. What we know is that this time is probably a bit approximate. It probably was about, 4 or 5 minutes after, but it's close. What's really fascinating here is just the edge on which this whole chart rests. We've got the exact square between mutable signs that we have, in the eclipse chart. Isn't that wild? I mean, it was 28 degrees mutable, and take a look at what's on the time that the court opened on the date that it was reading its decision. You can see that we've got the south node on the 5th cusp. It's ruled by the moon. The moon is in the 6th house, but I think the point that I want to make is that, we got a water sign here, south node, like I said, ruled by the moon. Moon's, being back into this. The moon and Venus are now in trine to each other, but the moon was just recently in square with Mars, and Mars is in the 9th house. Now, if you take a look at this, I think this is what's really fascinating, is that at the time this was delivered, there was an exact Mars-Saturn opposition. Saturn disposed quite a lot of planets in this chart. It disposes everything over here, disposes Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, the Sun, some of these planets in the 10th, just Venus in the 10th, connecting to, rule of law and themes like this. So it's a very interesting kind of signature. Mostly I find this fascinating because at the time of the Politico leak, Mars was at 15 degrees of Pisces. So there was a T-square, we were basically building ourselves towards a grand cross in this entire scenario, but there was a T-square at the time to this decision at the time of the Politico leak. I wanted to show you, the kind of connections, and this will be something that'll be important for us to explore later. This is the lunar event, the full moon that happened before the Roe versus Wade decision was announced. And look at this. I mean, the repetition of these themes, it is so reliable. South node on the ascendant, water signs on the 1st, 5th, and the 9th. The moon rules the ascendant. It's in opposition to the sun, obviously. Venus is in the 6th house. We can find Mars and Saturn in the applying part of their opposition at this stage. And now we've got, the 10th ruler in opposition to the exaltation ruler of the 4th. And so it's an interesting signature to be working with. Jupiter rules the 9th house. It's in opposition to the moon as well, and combust, very close to, the conjunction with Mercury, but also applying to a square with Uranus, and Venus was recently in square to Pluto. So everything just in this chart just seems to be under a great deal of strain. There's not really a lot of rest or comfort in this chart. It looks like a very tense moment. And, there's something about that Pluto on the 4th house cusp too that I think really sets the tone for what happened behind the scenes over the coming decades as people on the right then began to organize and strategize over a many decades long plan to make this ruling disappear effectively for a lot of reasons. I mean, right now, I'll tell you what I believe as far as the Republicans are concerned. I'll just be quite honest with you. I think what's going on is there's a realization that white people are getting outnumbered. If you take a look at the birth rates, white people will eventually form a statistical minority in this country with the direction that we see fertility rates going. 60% of abortions are performed with white women. And honestly, I think that what this is about is a concern of losing a white majority population in this nation. I think it's as simple as that. There is obviously the religious argument that can be appealed to, but I think that's more of something that connects with the people. And I think the politicians are using that to generate some heat and rile up the base. Mostly I say that because their actual personal lives do not match up with any sense of religious morality that I can recognize. So it just seems to be a political ploy that's working and very, very successful and very well thought out. So at any rate, here is, the real striking signatures, I think, that I wanted to point out, which was the tension that was happening across the angles. We got Uranus and square to the ascendant. I mean, you already knew looking at this that there was no way that this wasn't going to be contested or argued at some stage. But what's really powerful is that Pluto right on the fourth house cusp, with Uranus there as well. If we, move forward, are there any questions or comments about the historical charts related to the original Roe versus Wade decision?
Hey Wade, it's Laura.
Hey.
I have a question. I know that people phrase, or like the way, depending on your kind of beliefs on abortion, that the arguments can get phrased in a lot of different terminology. But I was wondering if you're looking at the sixth house in terms of healthcare. Is there, I don't know, I just kept thinking about that as you were showing the
I'll tell you what I
charts.
did. Let me just be honest with you. What I did is I pulled all these charts and I stared at them until a pattern emerged. So I kind of didn't even, I'll be honest, I didn't look at the first, fifth, and ninth right away. I just started noticing that the same triplicity was showing up on the ascendant. And then I realized, well, if that's happening, because I know the astronomy of it, it must be happening in these other areas. And so the chart reinforced a theme for me. The sixth house definitely has relevance in these charts, and you will see it over and over again, because you will find the luminary in the sixth house. You have the Venus that's regularly in the sixth house. You will often have the sixth ruler angular in some way, often debilitated. So there's like a very clear thing, like you can see it, and all the things that I just said are true about both of these charts, that the sixth ruler was not angular here, but it's debilitated. Sixth ruler angular and debilitated. We've got the moon in the sixth, Venus in the sixth, important, connections and relevance. But I don't necessarily know what to make of all of that. I think this shows, and I remember, Laura, was it 2020? I mean, there was the Venus in the sixth house receiving the square from the moon, or Venus in Aquarius receiving the square from the moon in one of the Aries ingresses, and I think it was from 2020. And I think we talked about how that already looked like an issue related to women's reproductive health and something connecting to healthcare systems. And, honestly, a lot of people were elected in that year that are bringing certain things to light, now. So
yeah, that's part of what came to mind. I don't want to get this into like a huge philosophical debate, but I do think there's something about like a women's, or like, a person that can be inseminated view of healthcare, where it's putting the woman's body first and considering all of the health implications of that. I think that's part of the problem here in the US, is that the right has dominated the conversation so much. And clearly we're looking at this right now, where it's important to be looking at the ninth house. But to me, it seems like there's something interesting about healthcare in this conversation, maybe the sixth ruler or something.
There's no doubt about that. And I think I think what's really hard is that everything with healthcare is also very politicized. What we have access to, what we don't, that everything is tied to an employer, and there's not, great access for healthcare that is, we don't have single payers. There's so many issues with healthcare too, that this is, probably a great case study into one example of how this manifests. So I agree with you. I think that's a good point. I'm sure that the sixth house will continue to be relevant in the charts that we look at as well. So if you see something you want to point out, hop on the line. And I appreciate you bringing that perspective as well, because that's what I was saying at the beginning. That's the kind of thought that, is great to hear from a woman. Okay.
Hi, Wade.
Hey, yes, Lena. And then we'll go to Jenny.
Oh, sorry.
No, Lena, you first, and then Jenny.
I just was looking at the Pluto on the fourth cusp there.
Yeah.
And that degree, I'm thinking, isn't that where the Saturn-Pluto conjunction started in the 80s?
Yeah, I thought it was, I don't know why I thought it was at 2 degrees. I don't actually remember now that I think about it.
The third one.
Yeah.
Okay. When there was a triple conjunction,
Yeah.
80, whatever it was.
Got it.
I'm pretty sure it's there. And I'm just not sure what to make of that, but I just.
Well, I'll tell you what I would make of something like that. I mean, then you're thinking about the 80s, you're thinking about the people who got elected to change policy during that time, you think about people who were born and have that signature natally, you know, those are the kind of things I think about. And you can also look for, you know, good like contacts to that conjunction, or pull up that chart, see what it shows. You know, that's the kind of stuff I would do with it if you notice that kind of connection. So you should look into that. So you might find something really good. Jenny.
Yeah, hi. A lot to take in at the moment, but I was just thinking that at the time of the court deciding on the decision in favour of women, how much of this current decision making is going to make a lot of women feel uncomfortable, like they're going to be put back in their little black box in the kitchen and the bedroom and all the rest of it. How would we see that play out in the chart, where you've got the nurturing aspects of the women versus the male patriarchy role in society?
Right. Well, that's a very complex question. That was the thing I said at the beginning, that I don't want to overstep the bounds of what I feel like I can, you know, share.
Yeah,
and so what I'm trying to
okay.
do is make sure that I show the connections, and then, you know,
This is
encourage
where being a
colleagues to
woman
come up
helps.
and join in conversation, you know, as they see fit. I obviously have my own perspective on things, and I think it's reasonably well informed, but I'm always happy for it to, you know, grow and change. But you know, the way that I kind of think about things like that is, this is why I was saying in the beginning, I think that we would do well to, you know, spend some time thinking about what it means, you know, when this case was re-argued and this was the version of it that won, that there was a very hard contacts to a lot of planets at that time. You know, we've got the moon in square to a debilitated Venus. It's very angular, right on the 10th house cusp, moon contacting a Mars-Pluto conjunction at, you know, in that same place. So you start to think that there's layers to this, and I don't want to pretend that, you know, I've explored them all. I'm still, you know, just being mindful of the connections and allowing myself to make some space for there to be some meaning made there, you know, as I continue to deepen on this theme. But I wouldn't venture to you know, make a judgment call on that at this time. So I hope that's, you know, understandable. But why don't we, sorry, I'm trying to get myself moving forward in these slides. All right, why don't we go ahead and move forward and take a look at what's going on right now. And if you take a look at what's happening currently, this is the chart that we've got. Sam, it just flipped through my ephemeris, and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in November 1982 was at 27 Libra. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, appreciate that, Sammy. There was also a Jupiter-Saturn one in that time. So it might not have been Saturn-Pluto, but that 2 degrees did sound familiar, but I couldn't quite make what. But this is interesting. I mean, that Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the 80s then has a plug into this chart, because if it was at 27 Libra, first of all, that's going to be right on Kamala Harris's moon. And then which I always have to keep plugging because she just keeps showing up. But take a look at the moon here in the Aries ingress for this year. This is an interesting one, and it is one of those ones where, again, maybe to Laura's point, we're seeing an emphasis on that sixth house kind of theme. You know, the 10th and the 6th are showing those kind of water house themes that we've been seeing repeated elsewhere. The fact that they're showing up there tells us that there's a relevant angle that should be explored. I know a lot of astrologers looked at this chart. This is the Aries ingress for 2022. Oh, you meant the Jupiter-Saturn as the precursor to the 2020 conjunction. Oh, Jupiter-Saturn, yeah, got it. Right, so I think a lot of astrologers looked at this and kind of saw the same thing. I mean, the moon was headed right towards a square with Mars in the 9th house. There you saw Venus besieged between both malefics. You have a pretty messy situation in the midheaven. You've got the 10th ruler dignified in its own sign, but moving toward a conjunction with Neptune. And then you have the 4th ruler in its sign of fall and detriment, moving towards a conjunction with Jupiter. Now, the hard thing about this is it shows, I'll tell you what this is. If this is the ruling party and this is the opposing party, this is the opposing party expressing power, and the party in power allowing it. Because there's a conjunction with reception. There's no indications of conflict, and Jupiter's also not a planet to create strife or rock the boat or kind of create tension. So on that signature, watching how this develop, I'm a little bit nervous about this. Why don't we just go ahead and move forward? I mean, we've got that, Aries ingress chart that clearly talks about, something related to women happening in the courts or Venus related themes, but that definitely seems like a very relevant one. Moon making an application to a square with Mars. We've got the water sign in the midheaven and on the 6th house cusp. When we take a look at the Saturn-Mars conjunction that followed a little bit later, and I don't always look at conjunction charts, except I did with this one, and I'll tell you exactly why. And the reason is very simple. When you look at Norma Mccorvey's birth chart, do you see her 4th cusp at 26 degrees of Aquarius and her part of fortune at 24 Aquarius? So the 4th house, I think when people start studying astrology or horary in particular, they'll say things like the end of the matter. And what they mean, when they say that, it's like, oh, I've lost my earring. Well, let's look at the 4th house of the end of the matter. That is not what that house is about. It is about much broader legacy type end. And that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with the supreme legacy of, Norma Mccorvey's life is this legislation, no matter how she feels about that, it bears her name. It's plucked her into a position of prominence in a way that very likely would not have otherwise happened. And what I knew was that Saturn was transiting over the 4th cusp, and then I remembered, oh, but there was actually a Saturn-Mars conjunction that also happened on the 4th cusp, and we know that she's got Mars ruling the 9th house, and she's got Saturn ruling the 4th. The 4th is about opposing the 10th, so it's like opposing, the judgments or anything like that, or kind of fighting against some form of judgment. It's like opposing, bringing things out, which played out in her own life. But this transit is bringing these themes kind of from her birth chart out to bear. She also got, that conjunction was in square to her natal Jupiter. So that's the reason I looked at this Saturn-Mars square from Washington, D.C. And what I saw was, I thought, pretty shocking. Again, water signs on the 1st, on the 5th, on the 9th. The moon is in an exact square to Venus. Jupiter's on the cusp of the 5th house. But, this is where we get, these kind of interesting, okay, so again, Uranus on the 7th, again, we've got the South Node in the ascendant, want to point that out. Now, if we go back and take a look at this chart, which is the chart just before the Politico leak, we're building up now to talk about the astrology of the Politico leak itself, but this is the full moon or the new moon that happened, the eclipse, just before the Politico leak. So now with those signatures that we've already walked through, let's look at this chart again. We've already identified that there was a tendency for late degrees of the mutable signs to be on the ascendant. We saw that with the chart for when the court decided. This got released out into the public purely because of a leak, which I think, South Node about things ending, slipping out, things, escaping in this degree of Scorpio, which was on, like I said before, this is the, South Node transiting Norma Mccorvey's natal ascendant, the midheaven when her Roe versus Wade was first tried, and the ascendant when it was argued a second time. So that degree is not irrelevant to me. And that's why I'm thinking this 3rd house thing is, it's pointing to the leak in a very particular way, which means that the individual that we could say is the actual leaker themselves is this Mars person, because they rule the 3rd house. I think that is what we're looking at here, but I don't know what to do with that information at this stage. It's just an interesting observation. And this Mars individual, it's in the 6th house, so I think there's a link in perhaps with what we've heard from Laura. And this Mars is building towards a square with the opposition between Mars and Saturn at the time the decision was first announced. So we are, beginning to see the recurrence of very strong particular themes. Oops, sorry, wrong Wrong chart. Let's now have a look at the chart for the Politico leak itself. I mean, look at this. It's McCorvey's ascendant, the midheaven and ascendant of both times it was tried. It was the third cusp of the lunation before the leak, and now it becomes the ascendant itself at the time that Politico actually publishes this. To me, that's wild. I mean, we've got Saturn right on the fourth house cusp, transiting over McCorvey's IC. The moon is in the seventh house, in, separating now from a sextile to Venus, and disposited by Mercury, which is about to station. I mean, what's really interesting about this is Mercury is in the position of stationing now, and Venus from the fifth cusp on 0 degrees of Aries. I want to point out something that Alicia Lombard on Twitter said, and I thought she made a very good observation, that this leak was published the day Venus moved into Aries, and it conjoined the Aries ingress sun, which activated the signatures within this chart. Because Venus was the one that was besieged here, and that once it comes to the 11th, now boom, this comes out. And what she didn't pick up on that I'm building together is the sun rules the third house. Again, this idea of there being an informant, there being information that's put out. And I told you that I thought the informant was that Mars at 11 degrees of Scorpio or Pisces, but that was the eclipse, the solar eclipse before the lunation was released. I'll show you the chart, sorry, when the leak was released. When the leak was actually released, it was at 15 degrees of Pisces, and that's such a great signature of Mercury, 17 degrees Pisces, loose lips on that Mars. Very, very strong signature, I thought. And Karen said, isn't 19 degrees Scorpio the accursed degree of the cursed sign? It certainly could be. I mean, I have 20 degrees Scorpio rising, so I feel I feel a sense of almost too much association with that to really be objective. But I thought it interesting that a water sign's on the first, it's on the ninth cusp, and it's 20 again. We did see this is very close to Norma Mccorvey's natal Mars. We've got Mars. This is the actual publishing of the leak. So Mars is at 13. I said 15 and I was incorrect. I apologize about this. But you do get the sense now Venus having now left Jupiter, which was maybe a signature of the previous win in court. Now Venus has moved into Aries and it's making an application to Mercury angular. This Mercury is stationing. That's the signature of reversal. It's such a clear one. So the astrology really fits. I mean, the ninth house being ruled by the moon is making an application to Mars by square. Just really strong kind of astrology. And one of the things that I wanted to point out was it just seems, I know that this is not, a particularly clever point. But the astrology absolutely suggests that this is the defining issue as we move into the midterms. I'm going to show you something in just a minute that's like really shocking, or it was to me anyway. But we have, let's take a look at the Aries ingress for this year. Right, you see the degree that's rising, 25 degrees. That's the Aries ingress. Then the eclipse has that degree on the midheaven. Then this leak happens. Okay, Then this leak happens, and now what we have when we take a look forward, moving into the election year, something very unusual happens this morning at this time. Mars, oh, by the way, this full moon, this lunation, it is the lunation of the midterms. The midterms are on the 8th of November at 6:02 a.m. So this full moon will happen at the time that the polls open, and it's also an eclipse. Okay, so this is a lunar eclipse, whereas the leak was published after the solar eclipse at 10 degrees of Taurus. And now this eclipse is at 16 degrees of Taurus. It's conjunct Uranus. We've got water signs on the ascendant, ninth cusp, and the fifth cusp. The point I was trying to make earlier and got lost in trying to explain is that Mars stations at 25 Gemini. So that's Kamala Harris's ascendant. It's on the Aries Ingress ascendant. It's on the Eclipse midheaven. And now it's in the 8th house, ruling the ascendant. So, to me, it's just such a clear indication that this is going to be the defining issue as we continue to move throughout the next couple of months, leading into the midterms. And actually, to make that point even stronger, I wonder if I can just open up my software real quickly. Are you able to see my software? Can you just tell me yes or no if you've got?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. What I want to show you, I'm going to show you all of the lunations that are leading up between now and the election, okay? And I want you to watch. It's all going to be water, water, water for like all of them but 3 or 4. So this is I was just about to show you this actually. Maybe I can show you this in this chart. If we take a look at this, oh no, hold on. I want to bring that up later. Right. Here we go. So if you watch, we've got the water sign on the ascendant, water on the 9th, water on the 5th. And we'll just take a look at the next one. Okay, water on the 9th. And the lunation is in a water sign in the 5th house. Next one, water, water, water. Next one, water, water, water. Now I ran these for years. This doesn't happen all the time. It's got something to do with where Black Lilith is and what sign is rising. There's mathematics behind it, but okay, water, water again, 1st and 5th. 9th house in water, although, at this stage, I would not consider this one to me is very light. If there's 2 of them that have water signs, I think that's relevant. But when this one, again, is a little bit light, but here we go with, again, water, 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 water. In fact, these 2 have almost the identical ascendant. They've got very similar charts. So this will be a very interesting period to watch. This one doesn't have a whole lot going on in terms of water, except for the super conjunction of Sun, Moon, Venus in water in the 1st house with the South Node, Mars at that 25 degrees, now stationed direct in the 9th house, and a water sign on the 5th, and Mars making an application to square Jupiter, the ruler of the 5th and the 6th. So to me, this is still in the same theme. You can't talk me out of it. Absolutely the same theme leading up to the lunar eclipse that I showed you to start this off. So, to me, this just seems like a very striking set of symbols. And I think this is going to be dominating the conversation in the American political sphere leading up to the elections. And it may not be, that this isn't resolved by that time. It might just be about how politicians want to respond. But I think what's very likely is that we won't see any action that is sufficient coming from Congress. I'm not saying that astrologically, I'm saying it from a place of common sense. We don't have the majority in Congress to be able to pass this without having to run into a filibuster issue. So what that means is it's really kind of up to the office of the president to intervene, or this goes back to the people and we just let the chips fall where they fall. And this is where I get a little bit nervous about right, there we go. This is where I get a little bit nervous about the conjunction of Mercury and Jupiter in the Aries ingress, because it suggests that the party in power yields quite a bit. Now, I think we know that this was supposed to be published in June. I think I found the time that they intended to publish the decision. And I have some asterisks to put on top of this, but I think I found the time. Take a look at the left. This is the lunation that we've already looked at. That happened in 1973. That was just before the Roe versus Wade decision was announced. This is the lunation. 20 degrees with the South Node on the ascendant, 3 degrees Aries on the midheaven. And this, on June 14th of this year, we have the exact same houses. And in this chart, the story of pregnancy is very clear too. Water, water, water. The 5th and 9th house planets are conjoined together in the 10th house. The South Node is conjunct the 5th house cusp. The 9th rulers in the midheaven, the 10th rulers in the midheaven. It's all, to me, seems like a very loud and clear signature for an announcement like this to be made. And of course, this Venus-Uranus conjunction is in opposition to where that 20-degree Scorpio that was constantly getting hit in all the original decisions. So, it was McCorvey's ascendant. I'm just keep repeating this, but McCorvey's ascendant, the midheaven at the time it was first tried, the ascendant when it was finally tried, and then it keeps showing up in all these lunation charts in its own way. So now Venus is conjunct Uranus and the North Node on the other side. It just looks to me like a breaking of something. And the original decision, which happened, on a Mars-Saturn opposition, well, now we've got, these two planets, in opposition to each other, in very similar degrees, very similar placements. And what I find really fascinating is that with this syzygy, Mercury has returned to the degree that he was at in the eclipse that preceded the leak, but now he's direct. And making an application to Jupiter, which rules the 9th, and it's in the 10th. So this to me looks like this was when the court was going to be giving the decision. And then Lena's made the observation that the sun and moon are going to be hitting the ascendant descendant axis of the Aries ingress ascendant. Yes, so that's the point. I mean, the sun, that's why I think this was the time it was going to be announced, because I don't think that they were ever going to avoid the conflict that was going to come from that. And Mars was stationing at 25 degrees of Gemini, and that degree is super relevant in a whole bunch of other places. And this puts the moon in the 6th house, which gives even greater strength behind Laura's point about there being a very relevant factor of this that is related to healthcare and availability of healthcare. But I will say that this is, this is the end of the slides that I have prepared for you. I don't know if there's any comment or any question. Is anybody else feeling a sense of like, I was very impressed by these connections, and I felt a great sense of heaviness from them. What I wanted to show you real quickly, I did. I ran through all the lunations up through, I already did that. So we're good on that. Anyway, so I think this is the period we were looking at, but for the decision to come out, I think we've got very likely through the midterms that we're going to be dealing with this quite a bit, because the signatures and all of the lunations sent over Washington, D.C., they have very strong themes related to the water signs. And what I think about with the water signs is that triplicity rulership of Moon, Venus, Mars, South Node. Do you see now why I was talking about Moon, Venus, Mars, South Node were repeatedly coming up and connecting that to the watery triplicity? I hope you can see, that they really have been quite present. And Lori, I don't want to say, I'm not astrologically predicting which way this will go. There are I was explaining this to somebody earlier. Now that we've got this much information, it's like if there's a die roll with 5 different dice, 3 of them have been rolled, but we don't have the other 2 yet. If the next one rolls, and it can move the balance in a very different way, Lori. So we should never give up hope when we see these things. Ancient astrologers, they would use, charts like this to prepare for war. They would read, where their weaknesses were, point out to me when I need to be paying attention to, the possibility of misinformation going out, or where will I have a chink in my armor that I can't see right now? The wartime astrologers would be sitting there advising you and like, this is when you're most likely to, suffer some kind of damage. This is when you're in the best place to win back ground that you've lost. I think the hard thing is that, we're not really I'm not in a position to be advising anybody who could be, making any kind of moves like this, but I can at least teach, and show people what I've found so far, and hopefully add to the collective conversation. But if this country goes to civil war, I will probably turn into a wartime astrologer, because that would be a good way to use Mars ruling the ascendant. Julia says, clear and concise info, appreciate it. The patterns are astounding. I completely agree. I had a real sense of awe. It's a very hard situation that's going on. And I think what sometimes studying things like this remind me of is that we can get so in a place where all we see is the immediate event that's around us. And when we study astrology, we realize that these signatures have happened before, they will happen again. We have the opportunity to rise to the occasion, and we can see them, we can measure them. It's like being able to see when the tides are coming in, or when they're going out. So I was very, emotionally and spiritually impressed by the clarity of the signatures that I saw.
Wade, I have 2 questions.
Yes, Eileen.
One is how I can see how you're looking at, like, you know, a ton of different charts. And when you're at that stage of where you're just trying to figure out the overall patterns, how are you literally looking at them? Is it two at a time on a screen? Do you have like printed versions all over your floor? Like, how do you get that overview?
Yeah. Okay. So there's actually a lot of things that I could see that I missed because I don't have printed view out. It's all on my computer. So I have actually just invested in something that's going to allow me to have printed version of these charts so I can just back up, see what I'm looking for and move. So I know what you're describing because that brain chaos, it's a part of my, process that I'm trying to weed out because it does mean that I miss things sometimes. I feel like I would have seen if I had a way of like a more systematic way of approaching these things. So I've run now every lunation for the next 2 years. It's, I don't know why I hadn't had done that, but now I've got that and I can kind of see those and I'll get them up on the wall, same with everything like that. So that's where I'm going. But right now, it's a function of looking at a chart. And here's what I do with it. I spend 30 seconds. I don't give myself time to get lost. I grab the headline and step out. And I think if I stayed too long with any one chart, I would lose the ability to see the headline. So my suggestion is to jump in, see the big things that are happening on angles. If I'm looking for at a lunation, I know that what I'm going to be doing is paying attention to what's going on with the moon and the sun. And I know that the next aspects are going to be important. And I know that angular planets are important. And then I just kind of think, well, if I've got angular planets, what houses do they rule? Is there any relevance to those houses? So I start with the angles and work backwards, and then just eventually themes start to emerge. Do you have a second question?
Yes. My other question was, bearing in mind that this leak has happened under this Taurus solar eclipse, which is dominated by the Venus Jupiter conjunction in Pisces, which is so strong, so feminine, so benefic. Is it too hippie to think that ultimately the sort of female side of this argument can ultimately win, even though there's a lot of war over this to happen yet?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My interpretation on things like that is, first of all, yes. I mean, of course, the answer is yes. The question is, who picks up that kind of signature? So that's you got to direct where the signature goes. If there's a Venus Jupiter conjunction, we need to identify who Venus Jupiter are in these kind of scenarios. And I definitely think that a Venus Jupiter conjunction, it should give the possibility for a happy end to where this goes. But I think the broader lesson is that nobody's going to be happy. There's no scenario under which all people are happy, is what I meant to say. And so I think with signatures like this, it's kind of important. I'll tell you something else that happens all the time. People always look at Venus Jupiter like there's they're good guys, so they should do good things. But Venus Jupiter also, if you wanted a population boom in a certain community, what would do it? Venus Jupiter and Pisces would do it. So there's something also about this that is informing my viewpoint that signature can also be used for cross purposes. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Given what you said about your read on why this is, why it's been so politicized.
And I'm not even, probably somebody who should be, acting like a pundit on these kind of things. I told you my perspective, but that's because that in the actual document, there was something about having a supply of babies, a domestic supply of babies. Now, what does domestic mean? I know what it means in the hands of a white justice. They mean, white Americans. And the only other possible thing that I could think about was preparing for a draft. I don't know. There's nothing. We don't have any indication that there are population issues in the US. And so the draft part doesn't quite make sense to me. And so I am left with, if it's not about population growth, then it must be about stopping something from happening. And that's where the story gets a little bit more clear. And there have been quite a few academics who have published blog posts and things like this, who have kind of connected some dots that are a little bit beyond my skill to connect for us here. But I think it's a reasonable theory to start with. Or at least something to entertain. Laura's asked if I have any thoughts on the Mars retrograde later this year. And I just want to say, Laura, if you've got a thought, unmute yourself and let's talk. I do think that because it's Mars and it's retrograde, I think and it's in Gemini, we're probably talking about things that'll blow up in or around debates. I reckon that there's a whole reversal, very frustrating reversal that will be a part of this. And it's possible, because this picks up on Kamala Harris's ascendant, it's possible that there is a reshuffling that happens with the administration, the US administration, because remember that Mars retrogrades right on the 10th house in the Aries ingress chart. So that connects in with Kamala Harris's ascendant is on the midheaven, and then the moon's on her sun. And it's just, she's really got a lot of imprints on that. So I'm specifically looking at the ways that this impacts her and trying to keep my ear to the ground for anything that could even remotely sound like a shift in focus for her and what she's doing. But I don't know if I have anything more specific to say on that at that stage. I think, again, this is one of those situations where a few more dice, I think, would be helpful to roll. But I think the other thing to consider is that that Mars will station in square to this Venus Jupiter. So that also is like a thwarting of efforts of what this Venus Jupiter is doing. I think what's hard with predicting some of these things is we need to figure out, what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks in the courts. And when the justice actually makes the announcement, and when we've got that ascendant and we've got that moon and we know what we're working with, we can triangulate so much better. So if it's going to connect in with this issue, as I suspect it to, we really need that announcement to come out. So it's a little preemptive for me to, I think, probably weigh in too heavily on this. But have you been researching other things that you think it might connect into, Laura? I don't know if you have any thoughts that you might want to share. I know you do a great deal of mundane research.
I haven't thought about the Mars retrograde. That's why I was hoping you had
something. Sorry. Yeah, I know. I'm a very bad astrologer. I look at connections and somebody asks what it means. I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know.
Sorry, that first Mars transit of the Aries ingress ascendant happens on the 25th of October, which is the day of the next solar eclipse. The second lunar eclipse happens literally days before the lunar eclipse.
Yeah.
And then the third hit happens, there's no eclipse, but the moon is like within degrees of the Roe v. Wade 1973 final decision. Moon is literally 3 or 4 degrees
well,
apart.
we can take a look at that. There's no reason to make you have to say this from memory, although I'm impressed. We have, sorry, give me a moment. I gotta pull my, God. It's like my computer doesn't want me to access my chart files. All right, give me the finder. There we go. Okay, so let's have a look. You were saying, yeah, so this is the 25th, and this is exactly. And so this is where I was saying this chart, I think, has a very strong theme that, we can expect some, things related to this to be coming out. There's the Mars-Jupiter square, Jupiter ruling the 6th and the 5th, Mars in the 9th, right on the ascendant. Got Cancer on the midheaven, the moon's at 2 degrees of Scorpio. And if you remember, at the time that this case was first tried, and I can show you that in the background. No, I can't, not if I have that on. The moon was at 3 degrees of Scorpio. So we've got, is that what you were pointing out?
Just the 3 dates of the Mars transits to the Aries ingress in
Right, yes, and you can see it again there. Yep. I see what you're saying, yes, and it's all, and this one's interesting because it puts that degree right on the ascendant. But this one, to me, it's the 25 to the 8. This is a period where just looks dicey. That looks like a very strange time.
Yeah, and because those eclipses hit the Biden-Harris chart so strongly as well.
Of course they do. They hit them incredibly strong. You're absolutely right about that. Yeah.
So it's like it's not just that abortion is to do with everything that's going to happen in the US as we sort of go from Capricorn to Aquarius, but literally tied into the presidential transition from one to the other.
I speculate about that myself. What I know is that this issue is heated enough, and it's not about this one issue. It's about a million things that are converging into this one very heated,
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah, it
So,
just it's focused on abortion, but it's to do with like rights and privacy and other things.
yeah, that's right. So I have Mars transit, the US Uranus and US Mars 3 times each. The Mars Uranus cyber attacks, nukes. Well, that's a very extreme place to go. I think it's probably, I'm not saying that's not possible, but I would never want to just predict something like this. But I don't know, a Mars Uranus thing just sounds like protesting and rising up and that kind of stuff. Violence for sure. There's no getting away with that, away from that. Karen's asked, what do you think of the Sun Moon square Neptune in the June 14th chart? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I think. They never got to release it on their schedule. So it was like, it's like almost astrology proactively, so this is, if I'm right that it was supposed to be released at this time frame, then that's the interpretation I would make on that, which is that Neptune precluded the possibility of that information reaching us at the time it was intended to. And then let's see, and then oh yeah, Jennifer's just agreed with what I was saying earlier. Okay, well, that's really, are there any other questions or comments or anything before we close? All right, not a problem. I just want to continue to plug that if you'd like to, learn horary, at the STA, we teach horary astrology, teach to be quite proficient in that. And what's great about that is that when you're good at horary, if you enjoy these kind of webinars, you'll be able to do what I can do, because it's really just, taking a look at connections and using the ability to interpret one chart on its own and make combinations. So horary is a great way to get started working with this kind of mundane material. And then you know how to reach me as my web address and email address. I do want to say thank you all so much for joining. This has been, so great that you guys have been able to attend, and I appreciate the donations. I'm happy to say that we will be donating a third of the profits to organizations that are collectively organizing at this moment to respond to what's going on. So just want to say thank you so much, and wishing you all well. Okay, bye.